Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago. Michael?
Halloween is undeniably a trendsetter in modern-day horror. It is widely believed that Halloween wasn't the first slasher film ever made, but it was the one to popularize the genre. Directed for a mere $325,000, this independent film took the horror world by storm. I'd say without Michael Myers' influence, we may not have gotten Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, or Chucky. The opening scene is one of the most recognizable in film history. It is slow and methodic, with the music ramping up the tension and suspense as Michael goes in for the first kill. But what really blows it away is the reveal of who the killer really is. A little child. Not only is this a great way to start off the film with a kill, but it poses more questions that we want answered. In execution, the film is directed well. The camera work is great, and the lighting, the atmosphere, the music help to ease the audience into the story. While it is a short hour and a half long, some people have noticed that the film is a bit slow. But I am here to tell you, that's the fucking point. Films like Halloween, Blade Runner, and Alien use a slow burn pace to build the atmosphere and the mood of the piece. It can provide a sense of tension when needed. Much like a candle in a jack-o'-lantern, the flame is a slow burn, but it is great to watch. Later films, however, would take this pumpkin light and shove it into a wastebasket. Halloween also established what Scream would eventually point out in its meta-narrative, the rules of a slasher film. If you want to survive, don't drink, have sex, do drugs, and never split up. And the most critical thing that this film establishes, and something that has pervaded the entire genre since then, is the final girl trope in horror films. Laurie Strode, played by first-time actress Jamie Lee Curtis, was the trendsetter for the final girl. What makes her character last for so long in pop culture is how innocent she really was. She is just a normal, average babysitter that takes care of the kids, and she's very relatable in the sense that she's a kind, curious, and interesting person. When she is terrorized by Michael, we feel sympathetic because of her scenes as a babysitter. Now, I am not going to go into a deep analysis about what this film is about, but I highly recommend Nick Sphere's video on Halloween and Count Jacula's video on Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 for some great content about the film's influence. Donald Pleasence as Dr. Loomis is a great addition to the cast and adds some much needed exposition about the backstory of Michael. As far as technical achievements, this was one of the first films to use a Steadicam for a lot of its walking shots. However, for as much praise as I could give the film, I have a couple tiny nitpicks. The film is set in October, but the trees look like they're in spring or summertime. But things like that are just kind of small stuff. It doesn't get in the way of my viewing of the film. It may not be scary in the modern sense, but Halloween is a great suspense film filled with atmosphere, killers, and treats. It is well directed, while also laying the foundation for a new generation of horror films. The soundtrack is great, with the power to have a devoted fan base 40 years after the terror began in that small town in Illinois. Halloween gets an A. So tell me if you heard this one before. A famous director makes a well-regarded horror film. It becomes so famous that the studio wants to make another. The director doesn't want to make another, but passes the baton to another director as the producer. You get Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Revenge, and also Halloween 2. It had been 3 years since the first movie, and like any other successful film at the time, it needed to be milked by order of the studio. Most of the time, these movies turn out to be worse than the original or don't even match up. Fortunately, Halloween 2 doesn't fully fall into that pit of lame. The film was written once again by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, so the story does continue, albeit not too well. It does feel like a continuation nonetheless, and it is a logical step. It expands the idea of a masked killer in a crowd of trick-or-treaters, something that the film Hellfest is trying to make its own idea. The film begins immediately after the first film's ending. Just like in the last film, the film references some popular films. In the first, it was The Thing, a film that would be later remade by Carpenter himself, and in this film in particular, it is George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, in reference to the fact that Michael Myers, thought to have been dead, is still alive. For the most part, Rosenthal did a great attempt at replicating the style and movement of the original, but like with films in the 80s, it ain't a slasher without some gore. One would think that this was the director's or even the writer's fault, when in all actuality, the fault lies with this guy. Yep, Mr. Carpenter himself had the idea of putting in more gore. He actually felt at the time that if it didn't have gore, then audiences would be bored, considering at the time that Friday the 13th was such a big hit. Then what's the point of not having a Halloween film without gore then? To me, this is where the film loses the subtlety of the original. The original film led you with a sense of ambiguity, and in this one it slaps you in the face with a frying pan. It doesn't help matters that with this gore added to new characters that are bland, people will see that these characters are nothing more than husks waiting to be gutted. I'm alright with gore, but this film went a little bit too over the top with it. This isn't to say that because of the gore that it made the film bad. The writing, the hospital environment, cinematography, editing, it's all competently done. But a big flaw that I have with this film is how it doesn't work as a standalone. Because of the way it is written, you need to have watched the first one. Unless you hadn't seen the first one, Laurie isn't a good character. She just isn't set up very well in this one. But the best way to watch this film is to just watch the first one sequentially with the second one. In the end, I'm okay with this sequel. I have my issues with the film in regards to execution and some story points, like Michael being the brother of Laurie Strode. As of writing this, it looks like the new film will disregard the point entirely. It does end the story of Laurie in a good way, and we'll talk more about the ending of this film in my Halloween 3 review. But let's just say that the absence of Michael didn't last very long. I'm going to give Halloween 2 a B-. A year after the end of Michael Myers, 1982 saw the release of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, and it is quite possibly the weirdest entry into the franchise, and one of the most despised. Don't get this twisted with Disowned, because that is a film for another time, and while that film isn't good, it certainly isn't terrible. Let me explain. While I do think that this is still a mediocre film, I can respect it for what it tried to do, and that was to bring variety to the franchise. We all know how the franchise went after this film, but think about it really. The original intent of the franchise was to tell a new story centered around Halloween. After they killed off Michael in Part 2, where could they go? They couldn't resurrect Michael because it would be too much like Jason Voorhees, making him into a zombie and all. It needed a new direction. And that is why I respect this film's concept. It tried something new, and while it didn't work almost at all, the idea of a corporation, the very thing we buy into for our Halloween fix every year, could be manipulated into killing the very people they buy from them. It is an interesting direction, most certainly. While initially it was despised in 1982 because of the lack of Michael Myers among other things, it has since grown into becoming a cult classic. And for once, I am in agreement with fans. It is one of those films that I can look at and get a breath of fresh air after seeing Michael for so long, centered around a doctor who goes to investigate a murder for one of his patients, and what he finds is more than he bargained for with the Silver Shamrock Company, a group of people looking to sell innocent but deadly looking Halloween masks. But there's robots involved somehow. You see what I mean by this film being weird? It has so many oddball ideas that it feels unbalanced, but oddly enough, the most entertainingly bad franchise film I have seen in a while. On one minor note here, while I did like the music, the one thing that will drive me crazy is that damn Silver Shamrock song.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween.
You need to shut the fuck up!
Version rock. Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween. Version rock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horathon. And remember the big giveaway at 9. Don't miss it. And don't forget to wear your masks. The clock is ticking. It's almost time.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween.
There are things, however, to commend it for. Things like the pacing, the atmosphere, kinda worked. The cinematography, editing, and acting are all fine, but there is some noticeably bad actors. It just comes out as being an average on a technical level. Overall, I respect the direction they went, but it doesn't work almost at all. I don't think it is that good, but I enjoyed watching it. But hey, at least they tried something new. Halloween 3 Season of the Witch gets a C-. So after the flop that was Halloween 3, many people thought that the franchise was dead. But never give your hopes up, because sometimes the dead don't stay dead for long. Enter Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Taking place a near decade after the original events of Halloween, we follow Jamie Lloyd, played by Danielle Harris, who is the daughter of Laurie Strode. She begins to have bad dreams about a masked killer. She is taunted at school because her uncle is Michael Myers, and Loomis and Myers, who were thought to have been dead in Halloween 2, are back because the worst they got was some burns. To be very blunt, this film is not good at all. The first thing that is noticeable is that Laurie Strode is dead in this film. Jamie is orphaned and living with the Lloyds. What immediately ruins the story here is the lack of her involvement. Jamie's story in this is apparently that because she is related to Michael, that somehow means that she's genetically a killer. This makes no sense on a number of levels. First, even if Michael isn't a direct ancestor to Jamie, Laurie never showed any signs of being a maniac. Secondly, the ending comes right out of nowhere. While yes, she has been harassed at school because of her connection to the Myers, it feels very thin to have the ending of this film presented with Jamie on a stairway with a bloody pair of scissors. If I had rewritten this, I would have had Laurie more involved in actually helping Jamie with an increased aggressive behavior. This freaks Loomis out, understandably, and you could have this dueling ideals about being a murderer. Is it nature or nurture that creates murderers? Heck, you could even keep the bullying to help Jamie's choice. Before I continue with the bad, let's actually talk about some of the good. Loomis once again proves to being a great character in this franchise. He is optimistic yet doubtful. There is one scene where he asks about what happened to an ambulance that was transporting Michael, and when he finds out, he isn't surprised, which I found amazing, and it was kinda logical. Jamie, for the most part, is okay, but I wish there was more development for her character. Instead, we focus on no-name characters, and this should have been Jamie's story through and through. The movie is short, which saves the film luckily. The film runs at 88 minutes, 3 minutes less than the original. The cinematography, editing, lighting is all good here. The characters are watchable, and Michael is still a credible threat, but the rest of my problems fall on the script. It just plain sucks. Aside from the occasional moment of greatness, it is followed up underwhelmingly. This film may have been a return to form for Halloween, but it comes off as lazy and the cliffhanger is unearned. In the end, I ended up not liking Halloween 4. It's like a soft reboot like The Force Awakens, but tells you that your favorite characters are dead and you won't be able to see them in the rest of the series. And I'm going to give The Return of Michael Myers a C+.